Hey, it's Sarah Burke here from the Women in Media podcast. And before we get started on a new episode, could I get you to hit like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell, whichever app you do your podcast listening in. Make sure you're all set up so you know when there's a new episode and you can help spread the word. Oh, and if you're so inclined, could I ask you to leave a review if the app that you're using does that? You're the best. All right, let's get to the show. I'm Sarah Burke, and this is the Women in Media podcast.
I don't know if I want to leave the show right now. You know, I love my job, but I want to grow my family and I want to have another baby. And we were so excited to get pregnant again.
It became a bit of a martyr off. Like the less you did for yourself was the more of a devoted mother you would be. Yeah. And I was like, I'm not signing up for that shit.
My dad, I'm sure his friends sort of snickered at the idea that my mom was the breadwinner.
It's Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day seems easy enough to say this time every year, but the truth is, this year it comes with a whole lot of emotion. There's an ongoing international discussion surrounding a woman's right to choose what she does with her body if she becomes a mother. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm disgusted, I'm disappointed. Why are we still defending a woman's right to choose what she does with her body? We're going to have to get into this on a future episode, and please stay tuned in the coming weeks for a guest that will help us dig into this topic appropriately. But for today, this episode celebrates a woman's right to choose. If there's anything I've learned while doing this podcast, it's that every woman has their own story, their own priorities, and their own triggers. While having a family isn't part of everyone's story, it's a beautiful part of many stories that have been told here. I admire all the women who basically have two full-time jobs, raising children while chasing their dreams. Some of the stories you're going to hear are traumatic, and some of them are uplifting. My guests often share stories about their own mothers, some of whom are no longer with us. One thing I want you to keep in mind, too, is how many former guests on this podcast didn't share their stories because they're too painful. Silent struggles are everywhere, and we need to be more aware of this. In this episode, you'll hear the voices of women whose mothers have inspired their careers, women raising children while working in media, and women who ache because they can't. I'd like to dedicate this episode to my mom, who did the unthinkable in raising me. There is no greater gift than knowing you believe in me and everything I do. Now would be an appropriate time to throw to a clip, but that's always a hard no for her. As much as I tried to incorporate her into podcasting, my radio show, or anything else, she prefers to leave this kind of stuff to me. Love you, Mom. Thank you so much if you submitted a question or comment about motherhood in the media. Let's celebrate motherhood and a woman's right to choose.
Hi, Sarah. A current topic in workplaces is retention and recruitment of employees. Working moms already feel pulled in many different directions. One of the best ways to retain them as valuable employees is to offer them flexibility. Example, to be able to attend a school play at 2 p.m. for an hour with the understanding that they'll make up the time. It makes a difference for children. It helps them to flourish, helps them feel valued, and our future society is dependent on the well-being of our children. We all benefit, and we all need to share in that responsibility. Being a devoted mom and being a devoted employee don't need to be mutually exclusive.
One of the most listened to episodes of this podcast features Melissa Bub Clark, the now senior vice president of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment here in Toronto. She's actually been promoted since she was on this podcast, when she shared exactly how she's made this all work.
So the part of me going to MLSE was when it was sort of decided that MLSE and Live Nation were entering into this sponsorship arrangement. I was offered the job over at MLSE to go help run it. And I actually originally turned it down because my kids at the time were 2 and 4. And I mentioned earlier, I was super intimidated, and I thought, I don't have the energy or the chutzpah right now to go and prove myself in this big environment and work 9 million hours. And I've got these 2 little kids, and at the time, I mentioned him earlier, Dave Hopkinson. He was like, well, why don't you come and do it part-time? And I was like, no one does anything part-time in the music industry. I'm like, what? And he was like, why don't you come and do it 3 days a week? And, I did. So I said, okay. And I think probably, and I don't want to speak for him, I don't know that either of us thought that that was going to be a long-term arrangement by any stretch, or that I would still be doing this all those years later. But I did it for 2.5 years. I worked in the office Monday to Wednesday. I am no one remembers, like in the ebb and flow of a career. Sometimes, what I've certainly learned is they're not linear. They don't escalate the whole time. Like, it's pivoted, it's plateaus, it took a left turn. But those 2.5 years that I was afforded the opportunity to, Fridays, I volunteered in the classroom and like got to I honestly got to live both dreams. And, I was doing it at the time for 66% of my salary, because that's, if you were going to work part-time, you got paid part-time. I probably in hindsight would look back and say I didn't really work part-time. I had a BlackBerry at the time, and I would have been on call and I would have been working. And I think we've evolved a little bit from that too. But, 10 years ago, that still looked pretty damn good. And I am so happy that I stuck in it. Because at the time when I was, what do I want to do? And listen, again, I know there is a ton of luck and privilege in all of these decisions, but to be able to, kind of still do what I loved, but I wasn't climbing the corporate ladder at that point. I was just sort of maintaining what I was doing. But to be able to do that for a few years and take the time that I wanted and spend a little bit more time with my kids. And then when Oliver, who is now 12, but when he entered at that time, junior kindergarten was half day. So then when he went into senior kindergarten, it moved into full day. And then at that time I went back and I said, okay, the kids are in school full time now and I'm ready to come back full time. And they were like, here you go. And here's 100% of your paycheck. And
wow.
It was this seamless, like, okay, guys, I'm back at it. And then for a time I worked Fridays from home. Like, I feel so lucky to have been afforded that flexibility. And yeah, I felt nervous asking for it. I remember being in a meeting with some colleagues and they were talking about having an 8:30 meeting. And my colleague, Jordan Vader, looked at me and he said, does that work for you, Mel? Because I used to do the school run. And I kind of sheepishly, but said to him, like, no, it doesn't. Can we do 9:30? And he was like, yep, we can do 9:30. And
yes.
That's where I think it's a real, like, when I say it takes a village, it's like, we have to be not scared to sort of ask and step up, whether you're a parent or not, like to kind of ask of, this is what is going to work for me. And then we need to be surrounded by those allies that even at the time we didn't know that was allyship, but people that are going to say like, yeah, let's make that happen, or let's do things differently, or let's accommodate this. Because especially in our industry, otherwise there's a big female brain drain.
So there's two big things here that you've brought up. And the first is that I wonder how many women are listening to this conversation right now thinking, yeah, I'm ready to get back to work, but I know I don't have the capacity to do it at 100%, but I'd really like the opportunity to do some of it and, make my way in at my own pace. There are so many things that happen to physically to a woman's body after she has children, A, so that's part of it. And B, regaining your confidence, regaining your trust in your professional capabilities, that it takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. You have the baby, you're ready to go back to work.
Yeah.
So I think that's so important for people to hear right now. And the second thing is, again, using your voice, asking when you need help, or raising your voice to say, I know I have valuable input to this meeting, but that's not going to work for me at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm so happy you shared that. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. So it really is, I'm not sure I'm saying anything groundbreaking here. It is that whole mentality of it takes a village, and I am very dependent on my village to get to this point. I had two incredible women in our life who are still in our life. Esther and Cecilia, they were our in-home nannies who helped us through, I didn't have two at one time, but Esther worked with us for a few years and then Cecilia worked with us for a few years. Yep. And honestly, I couldn't have done my thing at the office without them helping me do this thing at home. I was always so grateful that my kids had other people in their lives to love them and look up to them. And I know that was a really privileged position for us to be in, for us to be able to have them. But there are a lot of people and there is a lot of people in my network that have helped me be able to manage all of it.
It kind of speaks to what you said, even from your professional life, asking for help when you need it to help you accomplish everything else going on. Sometimes you have to lean on others. So
asking for help when you need it. Exactly. And also like sharing the responsibility and the kudos, right? And I remember when the kids were really little, I would have felt sometimes, I'd go to the park and people would say things about, having a nanny or someone else is raising your kid, or, oh, you must not do that. And I used to be quite wounded by it at the time. It's something I didn't know the term self-care until, I don't know, when did that become a term? But I've been so comfortable with self-care for so long. And I think I learned that from my mom, whatever it is, sleep, exercise, whatever it is. But like, if you don't take care of yourself,
you can't perform.
You can't perform. And I remember when I had the kids being surrounded by women who it became a bit of a martyr off. Like the less you did for yourself was the more of a devoted mother you would be. Yeah. And I was like, I'm not signing up for that shit.
It's almost the same badge of honor people talk about, exhausted from work and overworked. Like a lot of people wear both those things as badges of
like
honor.
A busy off. Stop with the busy off. But when I look back, it's like, thank God for Esther and Cecilia. And again, they're still in my life, and I literally couldn't have done it without them. And I don't know why I would have pretended to have been able to do it without them otherwise, because I wouldn't have been able to.
I think so many women struggle with that idea of when they get a nanny, what other women think about it. And you have a full-time job that requires a lot of you. Yeah. And you're putting the right people that you trust around your children to make sure that everyone's getting what they need.
Yes. So, all of that.
Hi there. It's so cool that we can do this and connect to you in this way at the Women in Media podcast. And I just wanted to say that as a guy listening to this podcast, there's just so much that I've learned, so much insight, and it's so amazing to be able to hear just the different voices and the different outlooks on being a woman, working in the spotlight, working in the media industry, and hearing some of the challenges and the positions that you have been put in. And thank you for sharing all of these stories. It's so great to listen to, quite interesting and entertaining as well, which is always important. So thank you so much for doing what you do. If someone is expecting or they are a mom, how do you put your family and your children first, but yet also balance that with a successful career in media, in the spotlight, that presumably you have been working at and on for years and hustling long before having children? Could you speak to that concept on a healthy balance? Does that exist for mothers working in media?
This is probably the most common question women in media get. And I'll throw to Ivanka Osmak of Sportsnet next. This was recorded shortly after she returned from her maternity leave.
I'm going in at about 6 p.m, so right around dinner time and close to bedtime, and then I'm coming home around 2:33 in the morning. Although there was a triple overtime game a few weeks back where I got in at 5. So I was like so close to getting home when they woke up, and I just creeped up the stairs and crawled into bed, hoping no one would stir. So yeah, it's been a huge adjustment. I am very fortunate that I'm surrounded by wonderful people and help and support, including my husband, and we do have a nanny. So it takes a village is really true for us. And so it's been an adjustment, but we're making it work.
I've heard a lot of women feeling guilty about choosing their career over life with their family and having kids and all of that. And I imagine in your role that you had a fair bit of thinking to do about how you wanted to start a family as well. So going back to even before your first child, what were those early conversations like with your husband?
Sarah, we weren't going to have kids. Like that was it. But that was just my choice, and he was on the same page as me. But yeah, when we got married, we were no kid zone and looked at all our other friends having little ones and thought, good for you, not for us. And then something changed, I guess around when I was 35 or so, where we started to want kids, and I think appreciated our own families. We both have 2 siblings and are close with our families and have, weekends together or trips together, Sunday dinners. And I think we just thought we want to have that too. So our mindset changed around having children. And then I've never been the type of person that would think you can't do it all. I mean, you might not be able to do it all at the same time. And of course, I didn't know what exactly meant having a child, how much work, how tired you would actually be. But why wouldn't you? Like, I have many friends and girlfriends, successful girlfriends in different fields of work that have kids and they make it happen. I'm sure it's stressful and tiresome, but yeah, it wasn't almost a question of choosing a career or choosing a family. It was just, you just do it.
Yeah, you just make it work.
Yeah. And I mean, as I said earlier, we need support, especially with my hours and my husband's hours, who works a normal job, or normal hours rather, not a normal job, but hours. We couldn't, it would be very difficult for us. I think we'd end up resenting each other if we didn't have someone to help out and
make it work.
Because they're exhausting and they're a little full-time job in itself. So it's we needed the help, and that's what we got. And of course there was guilt bringing someone into the home who's getting close to my son and both my sons now, and seeing how much they love her. But that's a good thing. I'm reminded of that is a very good thing when they love her and she cares about them. And so I've let go of the guilt, and it's just I'm lucky that I have a great career that I love, and I get to come home to my wonderful family, which sounds all like really Disney, but yeah.
So my question for women in media, mothers in particular, is how do you handle when you first find out that you're pregnant and you're up for a promotion? Do you let them know? Do you hide it? And how did you navigate that particular situation where you are excited about your news, but you worry that possibly it could affect the future of your career?
Here's my colleague, Toronto radio host Melanie Mariani, on her journey becoming a mother in the spotlight and her experience with maternity leave.
I started doing the morning show with Adam Ricard after they moved Fred, which was a whole time during my pregnancy. Yeah, that's kind of when it all went down. But I really climbed the corporate ladder, if you will, Sarah. Intern to 10 years later, morning show on the edge. I worked my absolute butt off more than I've ever worked in my life for anything. So when I was doing the morning show with Fred, that's when I found out that I was pregnant with Vera, and we talked about this, how I felt. And then when I went on my mat leave, I found out that they had moved Fred back to afternoons and that they wanted me to come back after 4 months. So Vera was 4 months old, and they wanted me to come back and start a new show with a new person.
Ooh. If chorus didn't have anything to do with when you would return from that first mat leave, if it was in fact up to you, were you planning the full mat leave? Only because I often hear women saying that they want to go back earlier than the mat leave is finished.
Absolutely. I wanted to go back. I had said 6 months. So but after 6 months, I was going to go back. I think that women say a lot of things. I think that we say things because we're worried that something's going to happen to us. So we leave before we have our baby saying, oh yeah, sure. 100. I'll be back in 4 months. I'll be back in 6 months. I want to come back. I love my job. And really we're thinking in our head, like, I'm a little worried to be off work for my full mat leave.
What are those things? What are those things that you think about when you're off?
For me specifically, I know that I didn't want to be replaced straight up. I was like, if I'm gone, maybe they'll realize that that they don't need me as much as I think that they do, and they will bring somebody else in. Or maybe they will, because we had talked about how I had felt that my brand was changing, how I had felt vulnerable. Maybe they will replace me with somebody that is young, that can fill that role of that, young girl that's going to concerts, that's, still out there and is not tied down to having a baby. And these are things that, you're thinking because it's all new and you're trying to figure out where you belong, because you're making that massive switch and growth in not only, your career, but your life. Yeah. I also think that women, when we say we're going to go on mat leave, we think that it's going to be like easy to come back, after 4 months or 6 months. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, wait, this is hard. Like, it's hard to have a baby. And, I want to bond with my baby. All of a sudden I feel this love I've never felt before. I don't want to rush back to work, but, we've made these commitments, and a lot of the time they are to men who will never, ever be able to understand, on the level that we would want them to, what it would be like to give birth and then go back to work. I'm not give birth. I don't want to take anything away from dads, because, a lot of dads, it's hard for them too. Like it's their baby, they're bonding, and then they've got to go back to work. That's a whole other issue. But giving birth out of your body is definitely a different experience, mentally, physically, emotionally, than a man would have. We'll say.
We'll keep it at that. Yes.
Yeah. So after, them wanting me to come back, Vera would have been 4 months. I just figured out how to breastfeed. I was breastfeeding her. We're talking a morning show, Sarah. So I'm up at 3:30 in the morning, sitting downstairs, pumping out my full breasts with milk for about half an hour, trying to get milk out so that I can leave to go to work, so that, my husband can feed the baby while I'm away. And it was very traumatizing to do that. 4 months was definitely not long enough of a maternity leave. This is all on me, by the way. I said, I would come back.
Right.
So I had made the commitment. The chorus was amazing. They were like, we'll help you out. We'll even, help with your ride. We'll help with gas payments, because they knew that I was living far. And they were like, we're not going to expect too much of you. You can leave at the end of the show. Like, they were great. So this was on me, but it was very, very difficult. It was hard.
Right. Once you return,
Yes.
How does the conversation go about where your show is going, since Fred is now in afternoons?
Yes. So then I started doing the morning show with a friend of mine, Adam Ricard, who had been at The Edge for longer than I had. So he was a legend at The Edge, and I was so pumped to work with him, because he not just a great talent, but a great friend. So him and I started to do the show together in March, and then we did the show together for 2 years, I believe. I think it was about a year later. We'd been doing the show for a year when I found out I was pregnant, or maybe a year and a half. I found out that I was pregnant with my second, and I was excited about who I'd become and who I was. I felt more confident, but at the same time, I felt I still had that little bit in me that was like, I don't know if I want to leave the show right now. I don't know if I want to leave. I love my job, but here I want to grow my family, and I want to have another baby. And we were so excited to get pregnant again, and very fortunate to get pregnant again right away. So it was about a month after I had announced my pregnancy, made it public, that I got fired. I got let go. So Adam and our show got canceled. And it was a really, really hard time. It was, I said I developed a lot of mental health issues after that. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat a lot. I was pregnant. So I had to go for a lot of stress tests. I had to go to the hospital a lot. It was a really, it was a hard time. It was really a humbling experience, because being, it's crazy, because I felt like I was honestly in a 10-year relationship. Like I had built it, I had grown it. It was all I'd ever known. I spent all of my 20s in this relationship. And then just like that, it was like cut, like, see ya, like nothing, no packing up your stuff after 10 years, no saying goodbye to any of the people that had been in your life every day for the past 10 years. It was just like, it was cutthroat. And that's the industry, right? That's what can
happen at any time.
Sign up for when you start working in media. But it was especially difficult for me because I was pregnant at the time. And because I felt so hormonal and emotional. And I had already had that worry in my head that I wasn't sure if I should have another baby. And then I was like, did I make the wrong decision? And then I'm like, what am I thinking? What am I talking about? So it was it was a really, really hard time.
Unfortunately, it's pretty common to worry about your position changing or being eliminated altogether when it comes to a maternity leave in the media. Josie Dye is another colleague of mine and had her own difficult experience with maternity leave in Toronto radio.
So I grew up in a family where my father was the stay-at-home dad and my mom was the worker. And she built an empire. And that takes, from both parties, that takes a lot of sacrifice in the time that, I guess in the 80s and the 90s, that took a lot of sacrifice because my dad, I'm sure his friends sort of snickered at the idea that my mom was the breadwinner. And he used to brag about it, to everyone. I remember him bragging, oh, the wife makes the money, in the way that they talked about women back in the day. So I came from a very non-traditional family. And I had a businesswoman as a mom who gave me so much advice. And I don't think necessarily her advice is the right advice, but she gave me advice that worked for her. And she is, in her mid 70s and is still running 3 businesses. My dad is on payroll as the handyman and he is. And it's, I am really impressed at the way I was raised because it's not the norm. It's very unusual to find a situation like my own because I saw what my mom accomplished with 2 children. I knew I could do it. I knew that I would be able to do what she did. And she did a lot with 2 kids at home. So I didn't have any reservations. I always wanted to have kids. It was just something I always wanted. And I don't, there are a lot of words that need to be adjusted, like a working mom, you never hear about working dads. So for me, I had my mat leave and obviously the first time I had my child, I had a really sick child and I went back to work quite early because the opportunity for a morning show came up. My child was in the hospital for 4 months and I was back at month 6 to come back to the Edge. And I came back and I did a morning show that did not work, which we can get into later if you want. Lots to talk about with that. And then the second time I went on mat leave, I decided I needed a longer mat leave. I at least give myself 8 months only because I was dealing with a child who I had just got a diagnosis for, I think months before I became pregnant with my second. And so I had a lot on my plate and I knew that this time I needed the extra time. And everyone has a different way of looking at things, right? I mean, I think that it depends on who you are and what position you're in. I think a lot of this has to do with the failed morning show that I was in initially. I kind of need to tell the story in order to tell you how I felt. But I was in a morning show with 2 other people, but one other main host. And at the time, I didn't think that he related to our audience. I had been there for 15 years and I didn't think this morning show was going to work out. Because of that, I made an attempt to end it. And I called the program director and I said, I don't think, I knew I was going to either sync with this morning show or I was going to get off of it. So I said, I don't think this is going to work. And at the time I said that I was actually in the parking lot of K-Rock in LA because I was ready to just leave. I didn't know how else to get out of the morning show. And my boss at the time, Dave Farrow, said, come on back. I agree. We're going to fix this. And what ended up happening is that morning show broke up. From then, Dave moved on and there were different bosses, but it seemed like once you have a failed morning show, it's almost like you have this scarlet A that's on you. Take out the sexualization of it, but you're the one who's being ostracized for something that you did wrong, but you're still living in that building that you're in. And everyone is kind of worried about the conversation they have with you. Meanwhile, the person who initially, and this is my perspective, initially, didn't work out on the morning show was being given opportunities. It was a really hard time. And that's when I went on mat leave. So I went on the second mat leave during that time after a failed morning show. And I went for 8 months and I came back to a 1-hour show on the radio. Now, Ross McLeod gave me the 1-hour show, and I truly, truly believe that Ross thought it was the best thing for me. I think he thought it was going to be an amazing, cool gig. Like we were going to make this, put a press release out. And I think he thought this was going to be the most unbelievable thing. But for myself, it just was not what I wanted.
It wasn't enough to fulfill.
Yeah. And I am, if you know me, and I just don't think Ross and I knew each other very well at that time. I think he probably knows me a lot better now. But if you know me, I'm not the type of person to do a 1-hour show a day. I'm like, give me 12 hours of work and I'm satisfied and I'll do it really well. Give me 1 hour and I'll do a shit job. You know, like I need more. And that was the moment I decided that I can't stay and do this. And that's when indie came for me.
Here's a question that came in from a new mother admiring mothers in the media on social media.
You're still going to have those days where you wake up and you don't want to do it. You don't want to put on the face and the happy attitude. And when you have to be present because you're a person in the media, that's like a personality. That's a lot more difficult. And how do you manage that? How do you manage your mental health?
This one goes to Cheryl Hickey.
It's funny, on and off over the years, I've shared bits here and there. And I think through ET Canada, a lot of it is made to look really perfect, right? I mean, it's entertainment, it's flashy, it's Hollywood, celebrity, it's all that stuff. But it was stressful for me not to be the real me and do all of that. And that was one thing. And I'm starting to talk about a little bit more. I really struggled with the whole perfect thing. That was really hard and stressful. So especially over this last year, it's just been so much easier to be honest about things, especially when things are not going great in our family. It's easier if I disappear for a few days off of Insta story or I'm not posting as much. You can gather that maybe there's some tough stuff going on. So if I'm open and honest about that, I feel less pressure.
Earlier in your career, were the tools that you might have been using for self-care, mental health, different than they are now? Like you mentioned the, gratitude journal, it sounds like, in your morning routine.
I would say it's certainly gotten bigger. But my mom always did that. My mom was always very glass half full. She was always teaching us that you're in control of your mind.
What makes you decide to or not have your child be a part of your media presence or your social media following, whether you're choosing to present them and have them be part of your life and who you are in your social media account, or choosing not to?
When you were getting into the public eye more, becoming a host of ET Canada is, it's a well-known position. And I would say that almost everyone in Canada would know who you are. In separating family life and public life and all of that, do you remember those like first conversations maybe with your husband about how that was going to
go? Well, there's still conversations that we have now. My husband is incredibly protective of our kids and of me, but of our family. And, I think his whole, and I'm grateful that he has this view. The kids have their own lives. Kevin has his own life. This is my life. I've chosen to be public and open, but I have to give grace to my kids and to Kevin. Also, out of safety for the kids is a big thing. Because I think that's another thing people don't often talk about in the media is that there are some people who aren't super kind, and you have to be careful also. And I don't give a lot of light to that, but so that's a real part of this business. And for the kids, I think that having their privacy, especially when they're babies, I took lots of pictures and posted about them and that kind of thing a little bit. But now as they are getting older and they're identifiable, you'll see less and less of my son on my social because he's 11 and it's his life. And what was cute 2 years ago may be teasable a few years from now. And I want to make sure that I protect that for him,
For sure.
And my daughter too. I don't like to give much light to this, but there was a person who went after my family because they were convinced that we were going to be husband and wife, and they were very fixated on me, and they went after and went to my parents' house, and they were subsequently arrested and put away and all that sort of thing. And I think that for me, understanding that my personal safety had changed based on me being a public person became really scary. And I think realizing that I had now put my whole family in that situation was very hard. And then when that person got out of jail, having to live with that fear of, okay, well, what is it? Well, what's that? So, and then you have to go on air and pretend like nothing's happening and everything's fine and everything's good and be confident and all those things. I really struggled with that for a long time, and it gave me great anxiety. And even so, so that was a really, really big one. That was very pivotal for me.
Yeah.
It's really hard to explain that piece because I don't want to give a lot of light to those behaviors. But what did I learn from that? That I'm fiercely protective of my family. I always have been, but if you don't see their face on an Easter post or a Christmas post, there's a reason for me not doing that. I'm proud of them, and I'll show you their feet sometimes, and occasionally you see their face, but I'm really, really protective, and that's why.
When I had my daughter, I knew I was going to be a single mom, and I then very quickly knew that I was going to have to leave my radio career as an announcer. And I just wonder, have you ever come to that crossroads where you have to choose your family over your career, or even maybe just find a different branch of your career in order to be able to raise your family?
I think Kayla Gray's story will resonate here. This is right after I asked her about making history in the NBA's first all-female broadcast team, calling the Raptors game against the Nuggets in March 2021.
You can't be all of the things all the time. And sometimes life happens, and sometimes, you have to deal with other things, and you just have to deal with those other things.
So all the accolades that, people are throwing around, like your bio has grown a lot over the last year, right? I can sort of sense from what I've heard you say on this topic that you don't think of yourself as like this history making broadcaster, and you don't think about that game being that. What are the things that you come away with something that big from, thinking about how proud you are of yourself?
I think that I'm a pretty cool mom. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are.
I think Levi, like I honestly, like the only person that whose opinion I think I'll care about in the future of what I did and what I've done is my son. When he can verbalize that. And I have a tough time because sometimes I've had to like not be around him. I left, sounds terrible, but I did leave him for a whole month when I was covering the Amazing Race Canada. And our relationship was like boiled down to FaceTime, and that was incredibly hard. But, I had to do what I had to do, and, showing my son that doing the things that you have to do, but also that you want to do as well. It's important sometimes, and working is important, and finding something that you are so passionate about and you want to see through, that is important. And finding your purpose and walking in that and being kind and being gracious. Like those are the examples I think that I'm most proud of is, not really the accolades. They're great. They're cool. Like they're things that first with all women's broadcasts, like no one's ever going to be able to take that away from me.
Yeah.
But I just, when I look at my career, I just see someone who tried and like really, truly like bet on themselves to see it through. And they did.
What's a dream conversation you're hoping to have on your show, even if it's not booked yet?
Serena Williams. I think she's just such a boss. And also from a business standpoint, that's intriguing to me. But just her craft, the way she stays dedicated, the way that she also does not compromise as a mom. when it comes to laying out the things that she needs in order for her to do both. I think that would be a really good conversation, and we're going to say it out loud because it's going to manifest.
Let's make it happen. Yeah.
Let's make it happen.
Around this time of year, obviously, where Mother's Day is kind of everywhere you look. I personally don't have my mother with me anymore. I lost her to cancer a couple of years ago, and around this time is always painful. And being behind the scenes in media, and I think about other people that are also in the media, especially women who, maybe they've tried to become a mother, and this can be a real painful time. I'm curious to find out how they deal with their pain, and especially other people in the media, because especially if you're a personality, there's expectation for you to be on, and maybe not necessarily, depending on the job and depending on where you work, there's an emphasis to be happy and not necessarily be able to share how you're actually feeling.
Jan Arden was recently a guest on this podcast, and she's been pretty transparent about the grief of losing her mother, a pain too many know and understand. As we know, Jan deals with grief by having a good laugh.
And I tell this story a lot. When Insensitive was a huge hit in like 94, and I was in the States, I was in LA because I was a co-share between A&M America and A&M in Toronto. I was a co-sign. It hadn't been really done before. So I happened to be in LA doing some work, and I had been at this big thing with CeCe Peniston and Amy Grant and all these big artists like in the 90s from A&M. And anyway, I was going home, and the president of the record company at the time offered to give me a lift home. And it's not what you think it was. It was nothing gross like that. We were driving, and he was smoking a cigar. He was a huge man. He took up the whole backseat of the limousine. And I was staying at on Hollywood Boulevard somewhere, and he was dropping me off, and he goes, Jan, you're 30 pounds away from superstardom in this country. And he's puffing away in the cigarette, and I didn't know what to say. I just sat there so I got into the hotel, and I phoned my mom, fucking collect, because there was no cell phones. It was like 1994. And she gets on the phone, and she's like, I told her the story, told me I was 30 pounds away from superstardom. And she says, well, why didn't you tell him you didn't want to gain any more weight? And I thought, oh my God, that's the best. That's my mom. And when I hung up the phone, I thought, that's where I come from.
So I think the takeaway there is, if you're hurting today and missing your mom, think about the good times and honor the memories you do have. On the topic of infertility, there are people listening to this podcast who are silently struggling. And I'm certain there's someone in your family or circle of friends who could say the same. Entertainment host Terry Hart was brave enough to share her story on television and here on the Women in Media podcast.
I'm still very grateful that I chose to do that with my dear friend, Tracy Moore, who, of course, is the host of City Line. I was working at Rogers. Some people knew my story, which was my husband and I had tried to have kids for about 6 years. I had 5 miscarriages. It was really awful, really
Such a journey.
Yeah. Just a tough go, really expensive in every aspect of life, financially, emotionally, physically, the most expensive thing I've ever been on in every aspect of my life, expensive. It cost us a lot. Money, time, body, mind, soul. It cost us a lot.
And what even brought you to like the decision to share how much of what you went through?
I got frustrated. I got frustrated that all the stories that I was hearing of people on television talking about struggling with infertility always ended up with a baby. People always talk about, I struggled with infertility and, infertility this
and here's my happy ending.
Yeah. Infertility is not something you struggle with. You are either infertile or you're not. You struggle to get pregnant. Mm-hmm. I struggled to get pregnant and then found out after everything that I am indeed infertile. And so I thought it was really important. Words matter and language matters. Yes. And I wanted to give other people, I knew there were other people like me who had gone through all the doctors, all the needles, all the surgeries, everything you can do, all the Chinese medicine, all the acupuncture, you name it. I drank all the teas. I did it all. That didn't end up with a baby. And I thought that I could give a voice to that.
And I think you did.
And give a face to that. And the response was extraordinary. I got handwritten letters sent to me that would break your heart. Women who were in their 60s. I did this years ago now.
Yeah.
And women who were in their 60s who said, this is the first time I actually saw my story on television. And, it is an epidemic. People are waiting longer to have children, to try and get pregnant. And that, the number is the number. Women's fertility starts to decline at the age of 35. Period, full stop. Nobody's lying about that. Many, many people have successful, wonderful pregnancies after the age of 35. I only hope that for everybody who wants it. But the truth is, women's fertility starts to decline after the age of 35 quite significantly. And there are all kinds of other things that contribute to struggling to get pregnant, whether it be hormones, whether it be how many years we were all on the pill. I don't know. I'm not a medical doctor. I know that my story is what it was. And I know there are a lot of other people who also lived that story.
The more we talk about the hard things, the easier it gets to talk about the hard things. You know what? This also needs to be said. Big love to the stepmoms and to the moms who have adopted. But let's remember, not all women desire to have children.
When you reach a certain age, everyone wants to know, when will you settle down, get married, and have children? That's the norm in society. But what happens if having children just isn't what you want?
It's a woman's right to choose. This got me thinking about matriarchy. A matriarch is defined as a woman who is the head of a family or tribe or an elder within a family organization. While it's common to assume it's someone who actually birthed a child, we can also think about this from a female leadership perspective. Matriarchy is front and center in ancient indigenous teachings, and it plays a huge role in how Amanda Rayom and Shoshona Kish built their new record label, Ishkade Records.
I think that we came to some intentionality around that matriarchal energy that we ourselves are looking towards to empower the work that we do. We work really closely with elders and these really powerful women who are teaching us, helping us along our path and sort of propping us up as we do this work. And also like really sourcing that sense of matriarchy in ourselves, but I mean, we come from matriarchal lineages, and that our cultures as the Anishinaabe are led by women. I think it's a really powerful notion for us to contemplate what it means to, bring and respect women's leadership in ways that have not happened in our lifetimes. And that is not to say that there aren't women rising and that leadership isn't evident, but I think all of this sort of footholds of power remain in the hands of the patriarchy. And in our culture, it's cycled through many times. We are, like, in the most traditional sense, a matriarchal society, but there have been times where the power came out of balance, became undone. And it was said that the women were too powerful, and there were transitions of power to men. And then it transitioned back to the women holding that power. And it's been something that culturally has been discussed, and was part of that ultimately like balancing energy that I think our teachings like go back to centrally. So, I think that there's been a really long time where it's been about the patriarchy, and now there needs to be a balancing effect, and it's not like down with the man so much as, I mean, I am like that sometimes, but
it's about up with the women.
Yeah. Like there's wisdom we need there. There's power and strength that we need there.
I wanted to end this podcast on that note. Within every woman lives that power and strength, whether she chooses to become a mother or not, and whether she is able to become a mother or not. Big love to you today if you're hurting. Happy Mother's Day to those celebrating. And hell yeah to those fighting for our right to choose. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Mercedes Nichol, 4-time Winter Olympian and host of Dropping In, a podcast with Mercedes. This is a podcast where I interview a bunch of different people. I get the good, the bad, and the ugly, as well as I share my stories along the way. Now you can drop in at droppingin.com or subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. I'll see you soon.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.